German Shepherd puppies were tied to a tree, and it seemed like no one was going to help them. But what this veteran did next will leave you speechless. Jake Turner was finally home. But home didn't feel like home anymore. The plane had touched down on American soil 3 days ago, yet the storm inside Jake hadn't settled. He stood on the porch of his late parents' farmhouse just outside town, staring out across the open field. Wind rippled through the wheat like a memory trying to surface. But he couldn't feel it. Not really. His duffel bag was still by the door, half unpacked. The flag folded into a triangle from his best friend's casket sat on the mantel, untouched. That was the problem with coming home after war. Nothing ever stayed the same, and neither did you. Jake reached down and rubbed the collar still hanging by the back door. It belonged to Scout, the German Shepherd who'd been his best friend long before the military. Scout had been his shadow, his confidant, the only one who truly understood the silent spaces between Jake's words. When Jake deployed for his final tour, Scout had already been graying around the muzzle. He died while Jake was overseas. Heart failure, they said. Jake never got to say goodbye. That hurt more than the bullets. His boots crunched the gravel as he walked out toward the fence line, kicking at the memories like loose stones. The town had changed, new coffee shops, fewer faces he recognized. His phone buzzed, a message from the VA reminding him of his intake appointment next week. He swiped it away. How was he supposed to talk about what he saw when he couldn't even say what he felt? The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the golden field. That used to be his favorite part of the day. Now it just meant another sleepless night was coming. Jake needed to get away for a while. Just a drive. No destination, no GPS. Just miles. He jumped in his old Ford pickup and rolled the windows down, letting the cool spring air rush in. The countryside blurred past, dilapidated barns, rusted fences, fields of nothing. It was peaceful in the kind of way that almost hurt. As the truck bounced along an old back road, Jake saw a collapsed structure just ahead. A forgotten barn, half swallowed by weeds. He wouldn't have given it a second thought if not for a strange sound, a sharp, desperate whimper, cutting through the hum of the engine. He slammed the brakes. Jake's heart started to pound, not from fear, but instinct. That sound, it wasn't a coyote. It was too small. Too scared. He listened. There it was again. Whimpering. Faint, rhythmic, like it had no strength left. He shut off the engine and stepped out. Tall grass brushed his legs as he approached the barn. It leaned dangerously, like one more gust of wind might take it down completely. The air reeked of mold, rot, and something worse. Something metallic and sour. The whimper came again. This time closer. Jake stepped into the shadows, ducking under a fallen beam. Inside, the barn was dark but not silent. Breathing. Shuffling. Whimpering. He took another step. Then he saw them. 5 tiny bodies, huddled in the corner of the barn, barely moving. German Shepherd puppies, maybe 6 or 7 weeks old, covered in filth, shaking violently. One had a deep cut across its hind leg. Another's paw was tangled in barbed wire. And the smallest one, it wasn't moving. All of them were bound with zip ties around their legs, their mouths caked with dirt. Their eyes, where open, were wild with fear. Jake's throat tightened. What the hell? He dropped to his knees. The soldier in him kicked in fast. Assess. Prioritize. He reached for the closest pup, its fur matted with blood and feces. Its tiny body flinched violently at his touch. Jake swallowed back a surge of rage. It's okay, buddy. You're safe now, he whispered, barely hearing himself. His hands worked quickly, pulling out a pocket knife and carefully slicing through the zip ties. One by one, he freed them, whispering comfort he wasn't even sure they could hear. When he reached the smallest pup, the one not moving, his breath caught. Its eyes were shut. Its breathing was shallow, almost non-existent. Jake placed 2 fingers gently on its tiny chest. Nothing. Then the twitch. A flicker of life. No. Not today, he muttered. You're not going anywhere, little guy. He began chest compressions, gently pressing with 2 fingers, over and over. Time disappeared. The barn, the war, the pain, All of it slipped away as he focused on that fragile heartbeat that didn't want to quit. A gasp. A choking, wet breath as the puppy jerked its head, coughing and wheezing. Jake exhaled like he'd just won a firefight. He gathered all 5 pups into an old feed sack he found nearby, wrapping the smallest one in his own jacket. Their bodies were still trembling, but they were alive. Against all odds, they were alive. And so was something inside him. As he stood up with the weight of those pups in his arms, something shifted. The world didn't seem quite as broken as it had 5 minutes ago. He looked down at the trembling bundle and whispered, "You held on, so I will too." Jake turned toward the road. He didn't know where the nearest emergency vet was, but it didn't matter. He'd find it. Because for the first time since stepping off that plane, Jake Turner had a mission again. And this one? He wasn't going to lose. The highway felt endless as Jake's truck thundered down the backroads. Dust kicked up behind him like smoke from a battlefield. The old Ford rattled with every bump, but he didn't dare slow down. In the passenger seat, the puppies whimpered softly beneath the layers of towels he had scavenged from the back seat. The smallest one, barely the size of his palm, let out a faint squeak, and Jake's jaw clenched. "Stay with me," he muttered, one hand on the wheel, the other gently cupping the pup under his coat. Its warmth was weak but present, like an ember that refused to go out. He cursed under his breath, glancing at the time. It was almost 8:30 p.m. He hadn't thought to charge his phone after the long flight home, and the GPS app had died 20 minutes ago. There was no way he was making it to the city vet in time. Maybe the old clinic on Pine Ridge Road? If it was still open. The gas light blinked on. Of course it did. He slammed his hand against the wheel. "Come, old girl, don't quit on me now." 10 minutes later, he saw it. A battered wooden sign reading Westwood Veterinary since 1984. The building behind it was small, a squat brick office that looked more like a closed hardware store than a clinic. The lights were off. Jake pulled into the gravel lot anyway, skidding to a stop. He leapt out of the truck, puppies in arm, and pounded on the glass door. "Hello? Anyone in there?" he shouted, his voice breaking. "Please." Nothing. He looked down at the limp body tucked under his coat. Its tiny ribcage barely moved. He scanned the surroundings. There was a garden hose coiled by the building's side and a locked medicine drop box for after-hours pet prescriptions. Not helpful. But beside the door, a faded sticker read, "Emergency number, Dr. Janice Reed, 5557321083. Jake's phone buzzed on its last 2%. He dialed. Voicemail. No time. He rushed back to the truck, laid the puppies gently on the passenger seat, and focused on the smallest one. She wasn't breathing again. The shaking had stopped. No sound. No twitch. "No," he whispered. "Not now. Not here." He tilted her tiny head, cleared her mouth, and began compressions again. Just like before, just like overseas, when a child had collapsed in his arms after an explosion. That same desperate rhythm. "Come on, baby girl. Come on. You've made it this far." The world held its breath. Then, a flutter. A single gasp, as if the little fighter refused to give in. Jake let out a choked laugh, tears burning behind his eyes. "That's it. You're not done yet." A creak interrupted him. A woman in a flannel robe appeared at the side door, squinting through glasses. "Who? What's going on?" Jake turned, disheveled, desperate, holding a trembling puppy to his chest. "Are you Dr. Reed?" I'm Janice, yes." "What's—" "German Shepherd puppies. Bound. Starving. One's barely alive." He stepped forward, eyes intense. "I need help. Please." Her expression shifted in an instant. "Bring them in." Inside the tiny clinic, the air was sterile and warm. Jake hovered beside the exam table as Dr. Reed and a sleepy-eyed vet tech moved like clockwork, IVs, oxygen masks, warm blankets, antiseptics. The puppies, one by one, were stabilized. All except the littlest one, who remained silent, curled in Jake's jacket like a wounded bird. "She's critical," Dr. Reed said softly. "But you might have given her a fighting chance." Jake nodded, unable to speak. He sat in the corner, watching the others, for puppies, all trembling but alive, rest in their heated kennel. Their ribs showed through thin fur. Cuts and burns marred their legs. One had its ear half torn off. "Someone did this to them," Jake said finally, his voice low. Dr. Reed paused. "Yes. And they did it with intention." Jake's fists clenched. He thought about that barn, how isolated it was. How forgotten. That smell. The silence. Whoever left those dogs there hadn't planned on anyone finding them. But Jake had. By accident or fate he had. "What happens now?" he asked. "We'll keep them overnight. Try to stabilize them all. I'll report it first thing in the morning to animal welfare," she said. "They'll open an investigation, though, between you and me? Unless someone confesses, cases like this disappear." Jake turned his gaze to the smallest pup. Her breathing was shallow, but she was hanging on. She wasn't disappearing. Not on his watch. "What's her name?" he asked. Dr. Reed raised a brow. "She doesn't have one. They're strays." Jake shook his head. "She's not a stray anymore." He gently reached into the jacket and stroked her head. "She's Scout Jr." Later that night, Jake returned to his truck, exhausted and raw. He couldn't stop picturing those pups, their hollow eyes, their shaking limbs, their silent pleas. Something deep inside him had shifted, cracked open by fur and fear and the smallest heartbeat he'd ever saved. He sat behind the wheel, staring out into the dark road ahead. The war had taken so much from him. But maybe, just maybe, this was something he could give back. He whispered into the silence, "I don't know who you are. But I'm coming for you." Jake didn't sleep. He tried. Lord knows he did. After Dr. Reed assured him the puppies were stable, for now, he drove home in silence, Scout Jr.'s faint wheezing still echoing in his ears. But as soon as he hit the pillow, his mind spiraled. Back to the barn. Back to that flicker of life in a pile of near-death. And to the question that now gripped him tighter than any nightmare had in months. Who the hell does that to puppies? By 5:30 a.m., Jake was back at the clinic. Dr. Reed met him at the door, sipping lukewarm coffee from a cracked mug. "You know visiting hours aren't for another hour," she said, but her smile was soft. Jake just nodded. "I won't get in the way." She led him in. The smell of antiseptic hit him like a memory of a field hospital. But this time, there were no gunshots in the distance. Only the sound of tiny breathing. The 4 stronger puppies were still resting under warm lamps, for lines taped carefully to their legs. The 5th, the smallest, the fighter, Scout Jr., lay wrapped in fleece, an oxygen tube taped under her nose. "She made it through the night," Dr. Reed said. "Barely. But she made it." Jake didn't realize he'd been holding his breath until it came out in a trembling exhale. "She's strong," he murmured. "Strongest soldier I've seen in a long time." He pulled a folding chair close and sat beside her crate. For the next hour, he just watched. Occasionally, her paw would twitch, like she was dreaming. Jake whispered to her about the hills behind his old house, about Scout and how he used to chase dragonflies, about how there were still good things waiting if she could just hang on a little longer. When Scout Jr. stirred and cracked open one swollen eye, he knew she'd made the choice to live. And now it was his turn to make a choice, too. By 10 a.m., Jake was at the sheriff's office. He hadn't worn a uniform in months, but his posture still carried command. The receptionist, a thin man with a thick mustache and a bored expression, barely looked up when Jake approached. "I'd like to file a report. Found a scene of animal cruelty out on Old Mill Road. 5 German Shepherd puppies. Bound. Starved. Left for dead." The man blinked. "That's horrible. Did you see who did it?" "No," Jake said. "But I've got photos. Coordinates. And one of the pups almost died on the way to the vet." The receptionist typed slowly. "Well, I can log it and pass it along to Officer Travis. Might take a few days to—" Jake's hand slammed the counter, not violently, but with the kind of force that makes you listen. Those puppies didn't have a few days. The man flinched, eyes wide. Jake softened. "Please, just bump it up the list. Someone meant for them to die out there. I don't know who, but I know how it felt. Cold. Cruel. Like they didn't even see them as living things. The pause. Then the man nodded, quietly tapping in more details. I'll flag it. I promise. As Jake turned to leave, the receptionist hesitated. Thank you, for not looking away. Jake gave a nod. Looking away's how we got here in the first place. Back at the barn later that afternoon, Jake walked the perimeter like a crime scene. It hadn't changed. The rots still lingered in the wood. Flies buzzed around dried blood. His boots crunched over broken glass and animal droppings. But now he wasn't there just as a rescuer. He was looking for something, anything. And then he found it. A crushed pack of cigarettes near the back entrance. Beside it, a faded blue lighter with initials scratched into the side, JD. Jake picked it up, turning it over in his hands. The initials triggered a flicker in his memory. High school, maybe. Someone who used to hang around the edge of town. Shady type. Used to drag race and raise hell behind the convenience store. He pocketed it. There was more here. This wasn't a random act of cruelty. This was routine. Jake had seen that look in war zones, places where evil had space to fester because no one was watching. And someone around here wasn't watching on purpose. That night, Jake sat at his kitchen table, Scout Jr. curled in a towel on his lap, her eyes opening more each hour. Her ribs still showed, but her breathing was stronger. More defiant. He pulled out an old military field journal and began jotting names. Anyone in town who might be connected. Anyone who'd owned shepherds. Anyone with a temper and a reason to hide things in a place like that. Then he called his sister. Anna, he said as soon as she picked up. I need your help. And your camera. She blinked into the screen. Okay? Is this about the puppies? Yeah. I think someone's been doing this for a while. And I want people to see it. No more hiding. She raised an eyebrow. You're talking about a video? Social? Going public? He nodded. Exactly that. She smirked. You finally joining my world, big brother? Just borrowing it. To burn the bad guys down. Jake wasn't sleeping. He wasn't healing yet. But something in him had awakened. The soldier in him hadn't gone away. He just needed a new battlefield. And now he had 5 reasons to fight. It started with the lighter. Back in town, Jake sat at the diner counter, spinning it between his fingers while the waitress poured his coffee. The initials JD were scratched so crudely into the side that they looked like someone had carved them with a pocket knife in a fit of boredom or pride, or both. Hey Jess, he said without looking up. You remember anyone who used to hang around Old Mill Road with those initials? JD. The waitress squinted. Round the old barn? That place has been empty since the Garrison family lost it to the bank. Let me think. JD. Jake took a sip of the burnt coffee and waited. Joey Dean, she said finally, wrinkling her nose. He used to run with that rough crowd, right? Got caught stealing dirt bikes back in the day. Hasn't been around here in years, though. I think his brother still lives out by the mill. Jake's jaw clenched. What's the brother's name? Martin. Works odd jobs. Real quiet type. People say he keeps to himself, but I heard animal control's been out there before. Something about neglected hunting dogs. Jake stood up fast enough to rattle the sugar packets. He dropped a 10 on the counter. Thanks, Jess. She blinked. Jake? You okay? He paused at the door. Just hate seeing monsters walk around like men. Jake didn't go to Martin Dean's house that night, not yet. He wasn't stupid. But he drove past slow, headlights off, his truck creeping through the thick trees that framed the property like a curtain. What he saw made his blood run cold. A run-down trailer. A series of rusted metal kennels. And behind them? The shape of another barn, smaller, newer, and not as abandoned as it should have been. He snapped a few photos and drove off. Back at home, Scout Jr. met him at the door on wobbling legs. She had managed to hop down from the towel-lined crate on her own and made it halfway across the kitchen before toppling over like a drunk baby deer. She barked, weak, raspy, but defiant. Jake scooped her up and kissed the top of her head. You little rebel, he said with a grin. But his smile faded fast. Because if Martin Dean was still active, if he had dogs back there in those cages, what if those weren't hunting dogs? What if this was bigger than one incident? Jake returned to the vet clinic the next morning to find a surprise. A woman stood outside holding a bag of dog food and a bundle of towels. A man with a beard arrived minutes later, offering cash donations. Then a teenager in a hoodie appeared, asking if they could volunteer. The viral post Anna had made, a simple slideshow of the puppies, Jake's voice in the background, a single plea to care again, had exploded overnight. Hundreds of shares. Thousands of views. The town was watching now. But Jake knew attention alone wasn't enough. Not if the authorities wouldn't act. Inside, Dr. Reed met him with a concerned expression. "I spoke to the county investigator," she said. "He thanked me for the report. But unofficially? He said unless you have someone on video or a confession, it'll be difficult to pursue." Jake stared at her. Even with the injuries? The zip ties? The location? She nodded grimly. He said it's circumstantial. Claims they could have been dumped there by anyone. A familiar rage boiled inside him. That helplessness. The kind he thought he left behind when he came home. The kind where bad people slip through cracks and no one wants to admit the system is broken. He leaned on the counter. "So if the law won't protect them, we go public." Dr. Reed raised a brow. "What do you mean?" Jake looked her dead in the eye. "We expose them. We make this story so loud they can't ignore it." That night, Jake returned to Martin Dean's property, this time with Anna. She had brought her camera gear, a tiny drone, and a mic. They parked half a mile out and hiked the woods in silence. Jake was back in patrol mode, every branch crack, every shadow catalogued. But this time, his weapon wasn't a rifle. It was the truth. They reached a small rise that overlooked the kennels. Anna flew the drone low and silent. The camera streamed to her phone, and what they saw confirmed Jake's worst fears. Dozens of dogs. Some were German shepherds. Others were pit bulls, Dobermans, mixes. Some pacing in panic. Others curled up in tight balls, too scared to move. One looked sick, emaciated, foaming at the mouth. A few had wounds. All of them were housed in filth. Jake's hand tightened on the binoculars. This isn't hunting. This is a holding pen. A training pit. Anna looked up at him. "For what?" Jake's voice was hollow. "Fighting." They pulled back before sunrise. Jake sent the footage to an anonymous tip line, but he knew how that usually went. This would take something bigger. That night, back home, Scout Jr. curled up in Jake's lap as he sat in front of his laptop. He pulled open a blank document and began to write. Not a report, but a story. He told the truth. Every ugly, painful, honest detail. About the barn. About the lighter. About the dogs who wouldn't stop shaking. About Scout Jr.'s first heartbeat. And about the silence of the system that claimed to protect them. He ended with a promise. "If you're reading this, you're part of it now. This isn't just my fight. It's ours. And I won't stop until these animals are safe. Until justice isn't optional. Until monsters like this don't get to sleep easy while others suffer in cages." He hit post. Then he looked down at Scout Jr. and said softly, "We're not done." The post spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, Jake's story had reached beyond the county. Regional news outlets were calling. Animal welfare groups shared it. Thousands of strangers commented with hearts, broken emojis, and hashtags like #JusticeForScout Jr. and #RescueTheForgotten. For a moment, it felt like the world was waking up. But the storm came just as quickly. That morning, Jake stood in front of the old barn, phone pressed to his ear, when a black SUV pulled into the dirt lot. Two men in county jackets stepped out. Not animal control, law enforcement. "You Jake Turner?" the taller one asked. Jake nodded. "We got a call about trespassing on Martin Dean's property. You want to tell us why your drone was over his land 2 nights ago?" Jake stiffened. "Because there are 24 abused dogs locked up behind his house." Allegedly, the other man cut in. That footage wasn't obtained legally. Without a warrant or his consent, it's inadmissible. Jake's eyes narrowed. "You're telling me it's more important how I got the video than what's in it?" "I'm telling you," the taller officer said, "that you're walking a fine line. Dean's already filed a complaint. And if you post any more footage, he's threatening to sue for harassment. Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. So I expose criminal abuse, and I'm the one being warned? The officers didn't respond. They just turned and left. The dust settled, and Jake was left staring at the barn that had started it all. His hands trembled, not with fear, but fury. This wasn't just resistance. This was protection. Someone was covering for Dean. Or maybe worse, someone was in on it. That night, the flashbacks returned. Jake sat on the porch, Scout Jr. nestled in his lap, when the air changed. The wind caught the trees just right, the rustle mimicking the frantic sound of radio static in the desert. The flickering porch light became the strobe of a gun-mounted flashlight. A twig snapped, and suddenly he was back in Fallujah. The child had been maybe 5. Her legs crushed under rubble. Jake remembered digging through the debris with bare hands, fingers bleeding. She'd been breathing when he found her. Barely. He carried her 3 miles through enemy territory to the extraction point, cradling her like porcelain. She didn't make it. Jake had never told anyone, not even his unit, how he'd cried alone that night in the wreckage, whispering apologies into the sand. Now, holding Scout Jr., he whispered the same words. "I'm sorry I couldn't save her. But I won't lose you too." Scout Jr. whimpered in her sleep and pressed her tiny head against his chest. The warmth grounded him. She was alive. She needed him now. The next day, Jake drove to Dr. Reed's clinic to find her in a heated conversation with a man in a suit, clean cut, but with eyes that didn't blink enough. Jake recognized the type. Bureaucrat. The kind who polished badges but never boots. As Jake approached, the man turned to him with a forced smile. "Mr. Turner. I'm David Crane. I work for the County Public Affairs Office." Jake folded his arms. "Let me guess, you're here to tell me to stop stirring the pot." Crane chuckled without humor. "I'm here to help de-escalate. The story you posted has generated a lot of unwanted attention. We've received threats, and some donors are pulling funding due to the negative press." Jake raised a brow. "Negative press? Because I saved puppies?" Crane's voice lowered. "We all want justice. But there are proper channels. You've made accusations that, frankly, endanger people's reputations. If you keep this up, we may be forced to pursue legal recourse." Jake stepped closer, his tone ice. "You go ahead. But know this. If you spent half as much time investigating monsters as you do protecting them, we wouldn't be here." Crane flinched, then turned and left without another word. Back in the clinic, Jake slumped into the chair beside Scout Jr.'s crate. She was sitting upright now, tail thumping softly. Her eyes were clearer. Stronger. She licked his hand. He whispered, "You're tougher than half the men I served with." Dr. Reed came over, holding a small pill bottle. "Antibiotics. She's officially out of critical. Still has a long road ahead, but she's a fighter." Jake nodded. "She's not the only one." Dr. Reed sat beside him. "You okay?" He didn't answer right away. "I'm tired. Tired of yelling and still not being heard. Tired of people pretending this is just a pet problem. It's not. It's cruelty. It's evil. And it's being ignored." She was quiet a moment, then said, "So what do you want to do?" Jake looked down at Scout Jr., who had managed to crawl into his lap again. "I want to take this all the way," he said. "Expose every inch of it. Burn it to the ground." That night, Jake and Anna went live on her channel. They didn't hold back. Jake told his full story, how he found the puppies, how the system tried to bury it, how threats had been made. He showed the drone footage, the lighter with JD, and the evidence of injury on each pup. Anna edited in a clip of Scout Jr. taking her first steps. Then Jake looked straight into the camera. "I wore a uniform to fight people who did this kind of thing to people. So don't think for a second I won't fight for animals too. I didn't come home just to watch this happen in silence. If you care, if you're angry, say something. Share this. Donate. Call your representatives. Be louder than the ones who hurt and hide." He paused. "And if you're one of the people doing this? The beat. I'm coming." The video hit 250,000 views overnight. And the next morning? Jake got a knock on his door. Not from a cop, but from a stranger with a scar on his cheek and a shepherd tattoo on his arm, holding something wrapped in a bloody towel. "I saw your video," the man said, eyes red. "They dumped this in the ditch by my house last night. I thought maybe you could help." Jake stepped aside and took the bundle gently. Inside was a puppy. Beaten. Barely breathing. Jake looked up at the man. "You came to the right place." Jake didn't sleep that night either. But this time, it wasn't rage or nightmares keeping him awake. It was the inbox. He'd set up an email just hours before going live with the video, and now it was flooded. Hundreds of messages. Some came from fellow veterans. Others from rescue workers. Some from parents who said their kids watched the video in tears and now wanted to save every dog in the world. And then there were the photos. Horrifying, heartbreaking photos of other dogs. Mangled. Chained. Starving. Tossed like trash. All with similar stories. All from the same county. Jake's blood ran cold. This wasn't one man. This wasn't one barn. This was a network. A hidden ring of backwoods cruelty buried under years of indifference. Jake had poked the hornet's nest, and now he saw how deep it went. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He went to war. The next morning, the empty lot beside the vet clinic had been transformed. With Anna's help, Jake had borrowed tents, rented folding chairs, and set up donation bins. He made a crude sign on plywood that read, "Stand for the silent rally against animal cruelty, Saturday, 11 a.m. He didn't know how many would come. He didn't care. He would stand there if he had to, holding Scout Jr. in his arms, speaking into a megaphone to no one. But he wasn't alone. By noon, dozens had arrived. By 2, there were hundreds. Families. Farmers. Teens with signs. Firefighters with their K9s. Veterans in uniform. Shelter workers holding puppies. An elderly woman brought a cage with a tiny rescue mutt named Cookie who had survived 3 broken legs. They didn't chant. They didn't rage. They stood, quiet, shoulder to shoulder, holding photos of dogs they'd lost or saved. Holding signs with names like Scout Jr. and Rex and Angel. Holding space for the voiceless. Jake stood on a makeshift pallet stage, Scout Jr. in his arms, and looked out at the crowd. His voice trembled, but it never broke. "You've made me believe in people again," he said. "Not the systems. Not the titles. But you. The ones who still care. Who see suffering and don't look away." He paused, scanning their faces. Some were crying. Others were nodding. "We're not here just for these puppies. We're here for every animal hurt in silence. And for every person told it's not a big deal. It is a big deal. Cruelty is cruelty. And if we don't draw the line here, it moves somewhere else." The crowd clapped. Some cheered. Jake looked down at Scout Jr., who licked his thumb like she understood the moment. "And to the people doing this," he said into the mic, voice sharp, "your time is up." They made the evening news. That night, Channel 5 ran a segment titled, "One Soldier, One Puppy, One Mission." It showed clips from the rally, footage of Scout Jr., and interviews with attendees. Jake watched it from his kitchen table, surrounded by donations, puppy food, blankets, collars, and leashes. He wasn't smiling. Not yet. But he felt it again, that pull of purpose. That was when the knock came. Demanding. Jake opened the door, and came face to face with Martin Dean. He was thicker than Jake remembered. Greasy hair. Tattered Carhartt jacket. And a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, look who's got himself a little fan club," Martin said, voice like gravel and gasoline. Jake didn't move. "You shouldn't be here. Thought I'd pay a visit. Since you're so interested in my dogs." "They're not your dogs," Jake said coldly. "They're victims." Martin stepped forward, a shade too close. "Careful, soldier boy. You're starting to forget how this town works." Jake didn't flinch. "No. You are." Martin laughed, low and mean. "You think a couple sob stories and some viral videos gonna change anything? People like me've been doing this for decades. Hell, your neighbor probably comes to my place on weekends. You think they really care?" Jake's fists clenched at his sides. Martin leaned closer. You're poking around in things bigger than you know. Might want to stop before someone gets hurt. Jake looked him dead in the eye. I've already been hurt. Doesn't scare me anymore. Martin stepped back, the fake smile gone now. Just a cold warning behind his eyes. This isn't over. No, Jake said. It's not. And he slammed the door. Jake leaned against it for a moment, heart pounding. Scout Jr. was barking from the hallway, as if she could sense the danger. He picked her up and held her close. I've seen worse than him, he whispered into her fur. But I'm not letting anything happen to you. Or any of the others. He looked around at the walls, now covered in photos, in flyers, in maps and scribbled notes. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was a movement. The next morning his phone rang. It was the sheriff. Jake, the voice said cautiously. I wanted you to know, we're reopening the investigation. We've had some new information come to light. Anonymous tip about Dean's property. Looks like you were right. Jake's chest tightened. What does that mean? It means we're sending a team in. With a warrant. We'll keep you posted. Jake hung up and stared at Scout Jr., now chewing on a donated toy at his feet. He didn't say a word. But in his chest, something bloomed. The raid happened at dawn. Jake stood at the edge of a field just outside Martin Dean's property, eyes locked on the barn that started it all. A line of animal control trucks and sheriff's cruisers blocked the road behind him. Reporters lingered on the edges, kept at bay by yellow tape and firm deputies. The hum of drones overhead buzzed with tension. Jake didn't need to be inside to know what they were finding. He could hear it. The barking. The whining. The panicked yelps of dogs who had never seen sunlight without bars. Every cry made his fists tighten. Every bark made his pulse rise. He remembered those nights in Iraq, when the screaming inside tents wasn't from bombs, but from the wounded. Some people think pain sounds the same in every language. Jake knew better. Pain sounded like this. Dr. Reed stood beside him, arms folded tight, jaw clenched. Her phone buzzed with updates from inside. 32 dogs, she said softly. Some chained. Some caged. A few, already gone. Jake's breath hitched. But most are alive, she added. And they're going to get out today. That word, out, hung in the air like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The barn doors burst open. Officers came out, leading leashes and carrying crates. Dirty, trembling dogs. Eyes wide, ribs showing but alive. One of them, a young German shepherd with familiar amber eyes, locked onto Jake like he'd known him forever. Jake knelt down. The dog walked right into his arms. Inside the barn, the horrors were exactly what Jake had feared, and worse. Training pits. Shock collars. Blood-stained tarps. Tools for breaking spirits. Chains embedded in the ground. Martin Dean was handcuffed and stone-faced, led out by 2 deputies who didn't try to hide their disgust. He didn't fight. Didn't speak. Just glared at Jake as he passed, eyes burning with quiet hatred. Jake didn't blink. Martin had tried to live like no one would ever shine a light in his direction. He was wrong. By that evening, Jake's phone was blowing up. National news outlets were calling. Animal rights orgs were offering grants. A senator's aide even emailed saying she'd seen the video and wanted to talk legislation. But Jake wasn't interested in being a hero on camera. He was sitting on the floor of the clinic's recovery room, surrounded by blankets and bandages and hope, the name of the puppy dropped off days ago, now resting peacefully on his lap. Across from him, Scout Jr. sat upright in a padded dog bed, ears perked, tail wagging in slow, proud sweeps. She's gained almost a pound, Dr. Reed said, kneeling beside them with her tablet. Appetite's back. Vitals are strong. And I think she's starting to smile. Jake looked at Scout Jr., whose tongue flopped out with the same ridiculous charm that had saved her the internet's heart. She pounced gently on a toy and then looked back at Jake with a small bark. Yeah, he said. She's smiling. But behind the relief still lingered something else. Wait. It wasn't just about the dogs anymore. It was about Jake himself. About what he carried. What he never let go of. That night, he stayed at the clinic long after closing. Scout Jr. curled beside him as the moonlight stretched across the tiled floor. He stared at the ceiling. "I should have saved more," he whispered. "I should have known earlier." His voice cracked. "All that time overseas, people I couldn't save, a dog I didn't come home to." He broke. No fists. No fire. Just tears, silent and full. Scout Jr. stirred, climbed into his lap, and licked the trail down his cheek. And for the first time since coming home, Jake let himself be held, not by arms, but by the presence of something pure. Unconditional. Forgiving. That night, the soldier finally let go. The next morning brought something Jake didn't expect. Peace. It was quiet. The town still buzzed, of course. Dean's arrest was front-page news. Protests were forming against other suspected sites. But inside Jake's house, for the first time in weeks, the air was light. Scout Jr. was chasing a ball across the living room. The other rescued pups, now housed at a temporary shelter built behind Dr. Reed's clinic, were recovering fast. Applications for adoption poured in. And then came the knock. A small group stood outside, kids from the local school. They held a hand-painted sign. "Thank you, Jake and Scout Jr." Jake knelt beside them. One of the girls stepped forward shyly and handed him a collar, custom-stitched with the word, Valor. "We made this for her," she said. "She's brave. Like you." Jake's throat tightened. He fastened the collar around Scout Jr.'s neck. It hung a little loose, but she wore it with pride. "I think she likes it," he said. "Are you gonna keep her forever?" another boy asked. Jake smiled. "She's already home." Later that week, Jake stood on the steps of the courthouse during a press conference. His hands were rough, his voice quiet, but his message rang loud. This isn't the end. This is the beginning. He unveiled the launch of a nonprofit, Scouts Honor, a rescue and rehabilitation program for abused dogs, partnered with veteran support groups to pair recovering soldiers with animals who needed healing too. Because Jake finally saw it for what it was. Rescue goes both ways. 6 months later, the land behind the old barn had changed. What was once a graveyard for innocents had become a sanctuary of second chances. Gone were the rotted beams and rusted cages. In their place stood a modest, white-trimmed building with open play yards, shaded trees, and a carved wooden sign over the gate that read, Scouts Honor, Rescue, Rebuild, Rehome. Jake stood by the gate, watching as children tossed tennis balls to a group of playful shepherds. An older veteran in a wheelchair laughed as a 3-legged pit bull leapt into his lap, tail wagging wildly. A pair of teens handed out treats while puppies lined up like it was trick-or-treat season. Scout Jr. lay in the sun nearby, belly up, tongue flopped, paws twitching in a dream. She was healthy now. Not just alive, but thriving. Playful. Loyal to the core. Just like Jake. Inside the main building, Anna was filming a new update for their growing YouTube channel. What had started as a desperate plea had become a full-on media project. Rescue stories, recovery updates, behind-the-scenes training footage. Millions of views. Thousands of subscribers. And enough donations to keep the place running, expanding, and saving lives daily. Jake wasn't one for the spotlight, but he'd come to understand its power. Sometimes a story was the only thing that could cut through noise. Anna gave him a thumbs up from behind the camera. "You ready?" Jake adjusted the mic on his collar. Scout Jr. walked over and sat by his feet without a command. He looked at her. She looked up at him. He smiled. "Let's do it." The camera rolled. Jake stood before a small crowd, community members, press, local law enforcement, veterans, animal advocates. It was the shelter's official grand opening, and Jake had been asked to speak. He cleared his throat, voice steady. "I'm not a politician. I'm not a preacher. I'm just a guy who found 5 broken puppies in a broken world and couldn't walk away." The beat. Silence. Listening. "When I came home from the military, I thought my fight was over. I thought my purpose had expired with my uniform. Turns out it just hadn't found me yet." He looked down at Scout Jr., her new collar gleaming in the sun. "She did." A soft murmur from the crowd. People smiling. Some tearing up. "She reminded me what it means to protect something that can't protect itself." What it means to heal, not just others, but yourself. Jake's eyes scanned the faces in front of him. This shelter isn't just about dogs. It's about redemption. For all of us. After the speech, Jake walked the grounds with Scout Jr. beside him, leash loose but unneeded. They moved like a team. Like family. They passed a fenced-in area where a young boy sat beside a nervous mutt, holding a treat in one hand and a comic book in the other. The dog, unsure at first, slowly crawled closer, tail flicking. Jake stopped to watch. The boy looked up and waved. "This one's scared," he said. "But it's okay. I can wait." Jake's throat tightened. "Yeah," he said. "Sometimes they just need time." He looked down at Scout Jr. "Right." She gave a single happy bark and trotted off to greet a volunteer. Inside Jake's small office, the walls were lined with photos, before and after shots of rescued dogs, letters from adopters, crayon drawings from school kids, patches sent in by veterans across the country. In the center was a framed picture of the original 5 puppies, filthy, trembling but alive, taken the night Jake brought them to Dr. Reed. Below it hung a plaque that read, "To the ones who never gave up, and the ones who never let them." Jake sat at his desk, pulling up a new intake form. Another rescue was arriving tomorrow, a shepherd mix pulled from a hoarder house 3 towns over. The work never stopped. But that's what made it real. Purpose doesn't have an end date. It just needs a beginning. Later that evening, Jake sat on his porch, Scout Jr. curled beside him on a weathered outdoor cushion she had claimed as her throne. The sunset bled gold across the sky, the same way it had the day he first found the barn. Only now, everything was different. Jake was whole. Not because he was healed all the way, but because he was healing with every life he helped save. He looked out across the yard where laughter echoed and dogs ran free, and felt something he hadn't in years. He leaned down and scratched behind Scout Jr.'s ears. "You ready to rest, girl?" She licked his hand and wagged her tail. Then she closed her eyes. So did he. Please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to support the channel.